Michael Anderson believed in foundations. As an architect, he understood that the integrity of any structure depended on what lay beneath, the unseen network of concrete and steel that bore the weight of everything built upon it. He had applied the same principle to his life. His foundation was his family, Olivia, his wife of 16 years, their daughter, Lily, on the cusp of 15, and 10-year-old Sam, a whirlwind of energy and unfiltered questions. His structure was the house he had designed himself, a monument of glass, cedar, and fieldstone nestled in the manicured serenity of Maple Creek, Illinois. It was a good life, a solid life. He had built it, beam by beam. The first crack in that foundation appeared not with a roar, but with a whisper. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late July, the air thick with the kind of oppressive humidity that promised a thunderstorm but refused to deliver. Sam couldn't find his tablet, a minor domestic crisis that sent Michael on a reluctant search. He checked under the sofa cushions, behind the television, and finally in Olivia's walk-in closet, a space as organized and curated as a boutique. He was looking in a box on the top shelf, one labeled winter boots, when his fingers brushed against something hard and smooth that was not a shoe. It was a phone, a sleek, black smartphone, not her familiar silver one that was probably charging on the kitchen counter. A cold knot tightened in his stomach, a primal instinct overriding the logic that tried to supply a dozen rational explanations. He pressed the side button. The screen lit up, no passcode required, displaying a wallpaper he had never seen, a close-up of two pairs of hands, fingers intertwined, resting on the worn denim of a thigh. One hand was clearly Olivia's. He recognized the delicate silver ring she wore on her thumb. The other was a man's. His own hands began to tremble, betraying the calm he prided himself on. He swiped up. The message app was open. A single name at the top of the list made the air leave his lungs in a silent, ragged gasp. Ethan. Ethan, his sister's husband. Ethan Vance, the affable high school history teacher, the man who flipped burgers at their family barbecues, the uncle to his children. Michael sank onto the plush ottoman in the center of the closet. The scent of Olivia's perfume, a light, floral scent he'd bought her for their anniversary, suddenly cloying, suffocating. He scrolled. His mind, usually a precise instrument of angles and measurements, became a maelstrom of disjointed images and raw, unprocessed data. Can't stop thinking about last night. M is so wrapped up in his blueprints, he wouldn't notice if the house was on fire. You see me, E. You actually see me. There were pictures. A selfie of Olivia, her expression softer and more unguarded than any he had seen in years. A picture of Ethan, smiling, taken in what looked like the front seat of his car. A photo of their legs tangled together on a picnic blanket, the distinctive pattern of which Michael recognized. It was the one they kept in the trunk of Olivia's SUV for Sam's soccer games. Each message, each photo, was a sledgehammer blow to the foundation he had believed was immutable. This wasn't a fleeting mistake. This was a parallel life, a world of shared secrets and stolen moments blooming in the shadows of his own. And the man at its center was not some anonymous stranger, a faceless phantom he could hate with clean, uncomplicated fury. It was Ethan, family, the man married to his sister Chloe. He placed the phone back in the box, his movements stiff and robotic. He closed the closet door, shutting the evidence away, but the knowledge was out. It filled the air, thick and toxic, poisoning the serene quiet of his perfectly designed home. He walked downstairs and stood in the center of his living room, a great room with a 2-story ceiling and a wall of glass overlooking the backyard. He had designed it to feel open and boundless. Now it felt like a cage. The lines were too clean, the space too vast. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was an echo of everything that had just been broken. Olivia came home an hour later, humming, her arms full of groceries. She smiled at him, a casual, familiar smile that now looked like a grotesque mask. "Hey," she said, setting the bags on the quartz countertop. "Traffic was a nightmare." "You okay? You look pale." Michael looked at her, at the woman he had loved since he was 25, the mother of his children, the co-architect of his life. He saw her, but for the first time, he felt he didn't know her at all. The question was a single, jagged word in his throat. "Whose phone," he began, his voice a dry rasp, "is in the boot box in your closet?" The hum died. The smile vanished. The color drained from her face, leaving behind the stark, terrified truth. In the silence that followed, the foundation of Michael Anderson's life crumbled to dust. The confrontation was not a storm. It was a vacuum. All the air, all the noise, all the life was sucked out of the room. Olivia didn't deny it. Her guilt was a palpable presence, a third person standing between them at the kitchen island. Her confession came in fragments, whispered words that seemed to hang in the humid air like spores. "It started a while ago, 6 months, maybe more. We didn't mean for it to happen. I was just so lonely, Michael." Lonely. The word was a knife. He had provided everything, he thought. A home, security, a life other people envied. He had worked tirelessly, his love language expressed in AutoCAD and client meetings, in the solid reality of what he could build and provide. It had never occurred to him that she might be lonely inside the beautiful fortress he had constructed for her. He didn't shout. His shock was too deep for anger, a cold, dense mass in his chest. "Ethan?" he finally managed to say, the name tasting like ash. "My sister's husband, Liv? Of all people?" She flinched, wrapping her arms around herself. It wasn't about Chloe. It wasn't about you. It was about us, me and him. We just understood each other. Understood what? He wanted to scream. The shared mediocrity? The feeling of being secondary? Michael knew his sister, Chloe. She was a force of nature, a brilliant cardiothoracic surgeon whose life was a whirlwind of saving lives and publishing papers. Ethan, with his comfortable teacher's salary and easy charm, had always seemed content in her orbit. And Olivia? Had she felt she was in his? An adjunct to the great architect Michael Anderson? The thought was nauseating. He had seen his work as a gift to them, not a wall between them. The children came home from their summer day camp then, their noisy entrance shattering the fragile, toxic bubble. They talked about their day, oblivious, while Michael and Olivia moved around them like ghosts, performing the familiar choreography of parenthood on a stage whose set had collapsed. He helped Sam with a model airplane, his hands, usually so steady, fumbling with the delicate plastic pieces. He felt Olivia's eyes on him, pleading, but when he looked up, he felt nothing but a vast, hollow emptiness. That night, he slept in the guest room. The bed was unfamiliar, the sheets stiff. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the architect's mind replaying every family gathering from the past year. The 4th of July barbecue, Ethan and Olivia standing a little too close by the grill. Christmas Eve, a shared, fleeting glance over the heads of the children. A casual arm brush at Sam's birthday party. The evidence had been there all along, hidden in plain sight, a language of betrayal he hadn't known how to read. The house he had designed for comfort and peace offered none. Every shadow seemed to mock him, every creak of the floorboards a new secret being told. The next day, he had to tell Chloe. It was the hardest thing he had ever had to do. He called her and asked if he could come by her office at the hospital. Her voice was brisk, professional. "Is everything okay, Mike? I have a consult in 20. He met her in her small, sterile office, a space that smelled of antiseptic and achievement. Diplomas and awards covered one wall. Chloe sat behind her large desk, still in her blue scrubs, her expression shifting from impatience to concern as she took in his haggard appearance. "My God, you look terrible," she said, her surgeon's eyes assessing him. "What is it?" He couldn't meet her gaze. He looked at a framed photo on her desk, Chloe and Ethan smiling on a sailboat, the picture of a happy, successful couple. "It's Olivia," he said, "and Ethan," he said. He didn't have to say more. Chloe's shark intellect connected the dots instantly. The color drained from her face, her posture stiffening as if bracing for a physical blow. For a long moment, she said nothing. The only sound was the faint, rhythmic beep of a monitor from down the hall. When she finally spoke, her voice was devoid of all warmth, honed to a razor's edge. "Tell me everything." He did. He recounted finding the phone, the messages, Olivia's fragmented confession. He watched his sister, the unshakable Dr. Vance, absorb the information. Her grief did not manifest as paralysis, like his. It immediately began to calcify into a hard, cold fury. "The bastard," she whispered, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of her desk. "The condescending, cheating bastard." She stood up and began to pace, her movements sharp and precise. "I'm filing for divorce, today. I'll call my lawyer. He'll be out of the house by the end of the week." Her decisiveness was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. She was excising a tumor. For her, it was that simple. For Michael, it felt like his entire anatomy was the tumor. How could he cut it out without killing himself? "What are you going to do?" she asked, stopping to look at him, her eyes now filled with a fierce, protective pity for her younger brother. I don't know," he confessed. The kids will survive," she said, her voice softening slightly. "We survived Mom and Dad's mess. They'll survive this. But you can't let her stay in that house, Mike. You can't live like that." He drove home in a daze. The world outside his car seemed surreal. People mowing their lawns, walking their dogs, living lives that hadn't been detonated. When he got back, Olivia was waiting in the living room, her face puffy from crying. "Did you tell her?" she asked. "Yes." The silence stretched. "What happens now?" she whispered. "I don't know," he repeated, the words feeling like the most honest thing he'd said in years. The news, however, had its own momentum. Chloe, true to her word, had set the wheels of her divorce in motion, and she had called their older brother Mark. Mark was the protector of the Anderson clan, a big, broad-shouldered man who ran a construction crew. He saw the world in simpler terms than Michael or Chloe. There was right and wrong, loyalty and betrayal. Gray areas were for philosophers and architects. He called Michael that evening. His voice was a low growl, a contained explosion. "I'm coming over." It wasn't a request. Mark arrived 20 minutes later, his pickup truck rumbling into the driveway. Olivia, seeing his truck, fled upstairs with a quiet, terrified sob. Mark strode into the house, his presence seeming to shrink the cavernous room. He ignored the sleek, modern furniture, the carefully chosen art. He was a creature of earth and concrete in a world of glass and steel. "He called me," he said, his eyes blazing. "She told me everything. That son of a bitch. In our family? With your wife?" Michael just nodded, feeling hollowed out. "What are you going to do about it?" Mark demanded. "I'm trying to figure that out, Mark." "Figure it out?" Mark's voice rose, a tool of command on a noisy job site. "There's nothing to figure out. A man does that to your family, to my sisters, both of them in a way. You don't figure it out, you handle it." "Handle it how?" Michael asked, a new kind of fear, cold and sharp, piercing through his grief. "You make him understand what he did," Mark said, his jaw tight. "You make him feel a fraction of the pain he's caused. You make sure he can never show his face in this town again." The implication was clear, hanging in the air between them. Mark wasn't talking about lawyers or harsh words. He was talking about a more primitive form of justice. "Mark, no," Michael said, his voice firm for the first time in days. "Don't. It won't solve anything." "The hell it won't," Mark shot back. "It'll make me feel better. It should make you feel better. Where's your spine, Mike? He took your wife. He betrayed our sister. Are you just going to sit here in your glass house and draw sad pictures?" The insult hit its mark. Michael felt a surge of shame, followed by a wave of suffocating responsibility. He was now trapped. The betrayal was one monster, a shapeless beast of grief that stalked the halls of his home. But now there was a second, more tangible monster, his brother's rage. He found himself in the twisted, unthinkable position of having to protect the man who had ruined his life, not for Ethan's sake, but to save his own brother from a mistake that would ruin his. The weight of it all was crushing. He was an architect whose blueprints had been burned, a husband whose wife was a stranger, and now the unwilling guardian of a fragile peace he had no idea how to maintain. The storm had finally broken, not outside, but within the walls of his own family, and Michael was standing in the eye of it, utterly, terrifyingly alone. The days that followed were a blur of muted colors and muffled sounds, as if Michael were living underwater. The oppressive July heat sidled over Maple Creek, the air so thick with humidity it felt like a physical weight on his chest. His own home, a structure he had once moved through with unconscious pride, became a labyrinth of painful reminders. The kitchen island where Olivia had confessed, the backyard where Ethan had flipped burgers, the hallway where a family portrait hung, the four of them smiling, a perfect lie captured in a silver frame. He tried to work, retreating to his home office, a sanctuary of clean lines and quiet focus, but he couldn't. He'd stare at the blueprints for a new community center, the precise black lines on the vast white paper blurring into an indecipherable mess. The logic of load-bearing walls and structural integrity felt like a bitter joke when the very framework of his life had proven so fragile. His clients called, their voices impatient, and he would murmur excuses about a family emergency, the words feeling both true and wholly inadequate. Olivia moved into the guest room permanently. They were two ghosts haunting the same house, communicating in the sterile language of logistics. Sam has software practice at 4. Lily needs to be picked up from her friend's house. I'll handle dinner. The emotional chasm between them was too wide to shout across. Sometimes he would see her staring out the window, her face a mask of regret, and a flicker of the old affection would stir, only to be instantly extinguished by the cold reality of her betrayal. Who was she pining for? Him or Ethan? The not knowing was a special kind of torture. He felt a gnawing, obsessive need to understand. He would lie awake at night, his architect's mind trained to deconstruct and analyze, replaying every scene, searching for the moment the first crack had formed. Was it that time he'd been too busy with a deadline to go on their anniversary trip? The way his attention had drifted when she talked about her book club? He was dissecting the corpse of his marriage, looking for a cause of death, wondering if he was the one who had administered the slow-acting poison of neglect long before Ethan delivered the final fatal blow. Chloe, in stark contrast, was a whirlwind of decisive action. Ethan was out of her house within 48 hours, staying in a sad, furnished apartment on the other side of town. Her lawyers were ruthless and efficient. She called Michael every day, her voice a clipped, steady anchor in his sea of indecision. "Have you spoken to a lawyer yet?" she'd ask. "Not yet." "Michael, you have to. You can't let this drift. You need to protect yourself, protect the kids." He knew she was right, but the act of calling a lawyer felt too final, a formal declaration that his life's most important project had been condemned. The real source of his escalating anxiety, however, was Mark. His older brother called him constantly, his voice a low, simmering threat. "Have you seen him yet?" Mark would ask. "Who?" Michael would reply, knowing full well. "Vance, don't play dumb. Have you run into him?" "No." Good, because if I see him before you do, I can't guarantee what'll happen. A man needs to be held accountable." Each call was like a tightening vice on Michael's chest. He started to imagine it. Mark, fists clenched, confronting Ethan in a parking lot. A stupid, testosterone-fueled fight that would end with police, lawyers, and another layer of ruin for their family. The image of his brother, a man who had always been his protector, behind bars because of Olivia's and Ethan's actions was unbearable. He felt a grotesque, suffocating sense of responsibility for Ethan's safety. This internal conflict was ripping him apart. He was drowning in grief for his marriage, but he was also terrified of his brother's rage. He couldn't eat. He lost weight. His normally sharp, focused mind became a fog of anxiety. It was Chloe who finally forced the issue. She showed up at his house one sweltering afternoon, finding him staring blankly at a wall in his office. "That's it," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I can't watch you disintegrate. I made an appointment for you. A therapist." "A therapist?" Michael balked. "Chloe, I don't need—" "Yes, you do," she cut him off, her gaze unwavering. "You think you're logical, Mike. You think you can figure this out like it's a design problem. But this isn't concrete and steel. This is a mess of grief and rage and betrayal, and it's eating you alive. You need to talk to someone who isn't me or Mark." She scribbled a name and address on a notepad from his desk. "Dr. Anya Sharma, Thursday, 4 o'clock. Just go. For me." He went, mostly to appease her. He walked into Dr. Sharma's office, a warm, inviting space with soft lighting and comfortable chairs that felt a world away from his own stark, modern home. The room didn't feel clinical, it felt human. Dr. Sharma was a woman in her 50s with kind, intelligent eyes. She didn't press or pry, she simply created a space with her silence. And into that space, Michael found himself, to his own astonishment, beginning to talk. The words came out haltingly at first, then in a torrent, the whole sordid story pouring out of him. The phone, the confrontation, Chloe's anger, Mark's threats. "I feel paralyzed," he admitted, the words sounding small and weak in the quiet room. "I should be angry. I am angry. But mostly, I just feel this immense weight. I feel like I have to manage everyone. Olivia's guilt, Chloe's anger, the kids' confusion, and Mark. I'm terrified of what Mark might do." "It sounds," Dr. Sharma said, her voice gentle, "as if you're trying to build a new structure to contain all this chaos, but you're using the same old blueprints of control and responsibility." The architectural metaphor hit him with the force of a physical blow. She was right. He was trying to manage an emotional demolition as if it were a construction project. "What's the alternative?" he asked, his voice raw. "To acknowledge that the old structure is gone," she replied, "and to allow yourself to stand in the rubble for a while, to feel the grief, the loss, the anger, without trying to immediately build something new, especially the anger." "I'm afraid of the anger," he confessed. "I'm afraid if I let it in, I'll become like Mark." "Your brother's anger is about action, about externalizing his pain onto someone else," she clarified. "Your anger doesn't have to be. Anger can also be a source of energy. It can be the fuel that tells you a boundary has been crossed. It can be the force that helps you clear the rubble instead of just sitting in it. The question isn't whether you feel anger, Michael. It's what you choose to do with it." He left that first session feeling not better, but different. A tiny crack had been made in the ice wall of his paralysis. He had permission to feel, to not have a plan. The next few weeks were a slow, painful process of letting the feelings in. He would sit in his office and allow the waves of rage to wash over him. Rage at Olivia for her deceit, at Ethan for his craven betrayal, at himself for his blindness. He didn't act on it, he just let it exist. He started sketching again, not for clients, but for himself. The drawings were dark, chaotic scribbles, fragmented buildings, structures with no foundations. It was ugly, but it was honest. He and Olivia began the difficult conversations about separating. They sat at the kitchen table with a mediator, a calm, neutral woman who helped them navigate the treacherous waters of custody and assets. During one of these sessions, Olivia finally broke down completely. "I know I destroyed everything," she sobbed, her face buried in her hands. "I know sorry is meaningless, but I want you to know, Michael, the loneliness was real. I felt like I was a ghost in this perfect house, and you were the only one who didn't see me fading away." He listened, and for the first time, he didn't just hear an excuse. He heard her pain. It didn't absolve her, not even close, but it added a layer of tragic human complexity to the catastrophe. He saw his own role in it. Not his fault, the mediator had been clear about that distinction, but his part, his emotional reticence, his assumption that providing was the same as connecting. The process was slow, agonizing. He was clearing the rubble piece by piece. But the threat of Mark still loomed, a dark cloud on the horizon. His brother's anger hadn't cooled with time. It had hardened, condensing into a singular, dangerous purpose. Michael knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this part of the storm had not yet passed. A final, violent squall was still coming. The call came on a Thursday evening in late August. The punishing summer heat had finally broken, leaving behind a cool, clean air that felt like a false promise of peace. Michael was in the kitchen, trying to help Sam with his math homework, the familiar frustration of long division a welcome distraction. His phone buzzed on the counter. It was Mark. "He's alone." Mark's voice was unnervingly calm, a dead flat tone more frightening than any shout. "Chloe's on a late shift. His car is in the parking lot of his shitty little apartment. I've been watching." The blood drained from Michael's face. The pencil in Sam's hand stopped moving. "Dad, you okay?" "Mark, don't," Michael whispered into the phone, turning his back to his son. "Don't do this. We talked about this." "No, you talked," Mark corrected him. "I listened. I've been listening for weeks. To you, to Chloe, to lawyers. I'm done listening. Some things words can't fix. Some things need to be set right. I'm going to handle it tonight." "Handle what? Mark, what are you going to do?" Panic seized him, cold and absolute. "Just make sure he understands," Mark said, and the line went dead. Michael stared at his phone, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was it, the moment he had been dreading. The abstract fear had become a concrete, immediate threat. He looked at Sam, who was watching him with wide, worried eyes. "Dad, what's wrong?" "Nothing, buddy. I have to go out for a little bit, an emergency." He called Lily downstairs, his voice shaking. "I need you to watch your brother. Don't open the door for anyone. I'll be back as soon as I can." He grabbed his keys, his mind racing. Ethan's apartment. He knew the complex, a nondescript, 3-story brick building on the edge of town. He ran to his car, not even thinking, just moving, propelled by a surge of adrenaline and terror. He wasn't racing to save Ethan. He was racing to save his brother. The drive was a 20-minute nightmare. He pushed the speed limit, his hands gripping the steering wheel. He imagined the scene, Mark's massive frame cornering Ethan in the dimly lit hallway of his apartment building. A confrontation, a shove, a punch. How quickly could it escalate? Mark worked with his hands. He was strong, and his rage was a bottomless well. A single, thoughtless act of violence would shatter what was left of their family forever. Chloe would lose a brother. His children would lose their uncle. And Mark would lose himself. He pulled into the parking lot of the apartment complex, his tires screeching softly on the asphalt. He scanned the cars, spotting Mark's Ford F-150 parked near the back, away from the lights. He then saw Ethan's sedan, parked closer to the main entrance. Michael's heart sank. He was too late. He got out of the car and ran towards the main door, his footsteps echoing in the quiet lot. He pushed through the glass door into the sterile, fluorescent-lit lobby. The building was silent. He saw the directory, E. Vance, Apt 3B. He took the stairs 2 at a time, his breath coming in ragged bursts. He reached the 3rd-floor landing and saw them. They were at the end of the hall, outside the door to 3B. But it wasn't the scene of violence he had imagined. Ethan was pressed back against his apartment door, his face pale and clammy with sweat, his expression one of pure terror. Mark wasn't touching him. He was standing a few feet away, his big body blocking the hallway, his hands hanging loose at his sides. He wasn't yelling. He was speaking. His voice a low, menacing rumble that carried down the corridor. The violence was all there, coiled and waiting, in his posture, in his eyes. "And you look at me," Mark was saying. "When I'm talking to you, you don't get to look away. You think you can just hide in here, wreck 2 families, and then just, teach kids about the Civil War like nothing happened?" Ethan looked like he was about to collapse. "Mark, I'm sorry. You have to know." "Sorry?" Mark took a half step forward, and Ethan flinched so hard he hit his head against the door. "You think sorry fixes my sister? You think it fixes him?" He jerked his head in a motion that Michael knew meant him. "You don't know my brother. He builds things, perfect, strong things. And you and his wife, you took a sledgehammer to the most important thing he ever built, and you did it with a smile on your face at my dinner table." Michael's feet felt rooted to the spot. He was watching his own pain, his own rage, being articulated by his brother, but twisted into something sharp and dangerous. This was the dark path he could have gone down. He had to stop it. "Mark!" His voice, sharp and loud, cracked through the tension. Both men turned to look at him, their expressions equally shocked. Mark's face hardened. Ethan's was flooded with a desperate, pathetic relief. "Mike, go home," Mark ordered, his voice flat. "This isn't your business." "The hell it isn't," Michael said, walking slowly down the hall, positioning himself between his brother and Ethan. He wasn't looking at Ethan. He was looking directly into his brother's eyes. "This is my life you're talking about. My family. Our family." "I'm defending our family," Mark growled. "No, you're not." Michael's voice rose, fueled by a clarity born of pure desperation. It wasn't the hesitant, paralyzed voice of the past few weeks. It was the voice Dr. Sharma had told him to find. "You're about to throw a grenade into the rubble. What do you think that's going to accomplish? You hurt him," he gestured vaguely behind him at Ethan. "And then what? You go to jail? Chloe loses a brother? My kids lose their uncle. You think that heals anything? You think that makes me feel better?" He took a step closer to Mark, lowering his voice. "Do you have any idea what this has been like? Waking up every day in that house, feeling like a ghost? Trying to figure out how to tell my children their lives are never going to be the same? That's my pain, Mark, mine and Chloe's, and you don't get to use it as an excuse to destroy yourself." Mark stared at him, his chest heaving. The rage in his eyes was warring with a deep, bottomless hurt. "He deserves it," Mark whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "Maybe he does," Michael said, his own voice thick with unshed tears. "I don't know. I don't even care about what he deserves right now. I care about you. I care about us. I've already lost my marriage. I am not losing my brother too." He put his hand on Mark's arm. His brother was trembling, the coiled energy still vibrating through him. "Look at me, Mark. This isn't the answer. Hurting him won't unbreak what's broken. It just creates more broken things. Please, come home. Let's just go home." For a long, agonizing moment, Mark stood rigid, his gaze locked on Michael's. The hallway was utterly silent. Then, something inside the big man finally broke. A shudder ran through his body, a single choked sob escaping his lips. The anger that had held him together for weeks collapsed, leaving only a vast, cavernous grief. He nodded, a barely perceptible motion, and allowed Michael to lead him away. As they walked past Ethan, who was still slumped against his door, Michael didn't even look at him. Ethan was irrelevant. He was a piece of the wreckage, a catalyst for the disaster, but he was not the point. The point was the man beside him, his brother, whom he had just pulled back from the brink. In the heart of his own devastation, Michael had found the strength not to destroy, but to save. It was the first solid piece of ground he had stood on in months. The walk back to the parking lot was silent, the only sound the crunch of their shoes on the asphalt. The cool night air felt thin and sharp in Michael's lungs. Mark moved like a man twice his age, the furious energy that had propelled him now gone, leaving a heavy, exhausted slump in his shoulders. They reached their respective trucks and stopped.
"I'm sorry, Mike," Mark said, his voice raspy. He couldn't meet Michael's eyes, staring instead at the cracked pavement. When I think about what he did to you, to Chloe." "I know," Michael said, and he did. He understood the rage because he felt it himself. It was a dark, humming thing in the back of his own mind. The difference was, he had been forced to stare into its abyss, while Mark had wanted to leap. "I get it. But that," he nodded back toward the apartment building, "is not the way. It just makes everything worse." Mark finally looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "What you said in there, about not losing you, you were right. I'm sorry." "It's okay," Michael said. It wasn't, not really, but in that moment, it was the only thing to say. "Go home, Mark. Get some sleep." His brother nodded, climbed into his truck, and drove away, leaving Michael alone in the near-empty lot. He leaned against his car, the metal cool against his back, and let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for a month. The immediate crisis was over. The threat of violence had dissipated, leaving behind the quiet, sprawling disaster of their lives. He drove home not to the house in Maple Creek, but to the small, temporary apartment he'd started renting a week prior. The decision had been made, quietly and soberly, in the mediator's office. The house, his beautiful, perfect house, was too full of ghosts. It was going on the market. The sale would be another severance, another amputation, but a necessary one. When he got back to his apartment, he called Chloe. He told her what had happened. She was quiet on the other end of the line for a long time. "Thank you, Mike," she said finally, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for stopping him. I was so worried." "We'll get through this," he said, the words feeling for the first time like they might actually be true. "Us, I mean, you and me and Mark." "I know," she said. The next day, Olivia came to the apartment to sign the last of the initial separation papers. There were no more tears, no more recriminations. The emotional storm had passed, leaving a strange, sad calm in its wake. They sat at a small dining table, the one piece of furniture he'd brought from the house. "I heard about last night," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Ethan called me. He was terrified." Michael just nodded, sipping his coffee. "Is Mark okay?" "He will be." A heavy silence fell between them. It was no longer the tense, angry silence of the first few weeks, but a weary, resigned one. It was the silence of an ending. "This house," Olivia said, gesturing around at the unfamiliar walls of her own past. "The kids, our life, it was a good life, Michael. I want you to know that I know that." "It was," he agreed, "until it wasn't." "I messed up," she said, looking down at her hands. "I was lost, and I made a selfish, destructive choice. I'll have to live with that forever, and I'm so sorry, not just for the affair, but for the man I let you think I was." It was the most honest thing she had said. It wasn't an excuse. It was an acknowledgement. Michael looked at her, the woman he had shared nearly 2 decades with, and he felt a profound, aching sadness. The anger was still there, a low ember, but it was banked by a wave of pure grief for what was lost. Not just his marriage, but their shared history, their future, the very idea of who they were together. "I know," he said. And in that moment, he realized that forgiveness wasn't a feeling. It wasn't a grand gesture of absolution. Maybe it was just this, the quiet, painful acceptance of reality, and the choice to not let the bitterness of the past poison the entirety of the future. It was the decision to put down the weight of his own rage, not for her sake, but for his own. His therapy sessions with Dr. Sharma deepened. They moved from crisis management to the slow, meticulous work of rebuilding. You've spent your whole life building structures for other people, your clients, your family. You built a life based on a blueprint you thought everyone had agreed to. Now that blueprint is gone. The question is, what does Michael Anderson want to build for himself?
The question echoed in his head for weeks. He started to find the answer in small ways. He reconnected with old friends from college. He took Sam to a Cubs game, just the two of them. He had long, difficult, but honest conversations with Lily, who was old enough to understand the broad strokes of the separation. He discovered that being a father wasn't just about providing a roof, it was about being present in the rooms beneath it. He and Chloe found a new, quieter rhythm to their relationship. They would meet for coffee, their conversations no longer frantic damage reports, but slow, reflective explorations of their new realities. They were two survivors of the same shipwreck, washed up on different shores, but able to find comfort in their shared story of the storm. 1 year later, the Chicago autumn had arrived, painting the city in hues of gold and rust. The air was crisp and clean, a welcome respite after the suffocating summer of the previous year. The house in Maple Creek was sold. The proceeds were split. Olivia had moved with the kids to a smaller house in a neighboring town, one without the weight of so many memories. Ethan had transferred to a school in a different district. The names and faces that had once comprised Michael's entire world were now scattered. Michael stood in his new apartment, a loft-style space in the city with high ceilings, exposed brick, and a large window that overlooked a small city park. It was nothing like the house he had designed. It wasn't a fortress of suburban perfection. It was a space that was open, a little bit raw, and entirely his own. He was co-parenting. It was awkward and structured, a world of shared calendars and polite handoffs, but it was working. He saw his kids every other weekend and 2 nights during the week. He was learning to be a different kind of father, more focused, more engaged in the small moments. The pain of not waking up with them every day was a dull, constant ache, but it was a clean pain, not the toxic, confusing agony of the year before. On his large drafting table, propped against the window, was a new set of drawings. It wasn't a mansion for a wealthy client or a sterile office building. It was a pro bono project he'd taken on for the city. The sketches were for a small, open-air public pavilion in the park across the street, a simple structure of wood and steel with benches and a roof that would provide shelter from the rain but would never fully enclose. A place for people to sit, to rest, to be with their thoughts. A place for community and quiet reflection. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Mark. "Chloe and I are grilling at my place Sunday. You and the kids in?" Michael smiled. "We'll be there." Their family was smaller now, scarred and reconfigured. It wasn't perfect. It would never be the same, but it was real. They were building something new on the fractured ground. He turned back to his drawing, picking up a fine-tipped pen. He began to sketch the details of a joint where a cedar beam would meet a steel support. He drew with a steady hand. The foundation was no longer the illusion of a perfect, unchangeable life. The new foundation was resilience. It was the hard-won knowledge that a structure could be shattered, and that life, his life, could be rebuilt. Not the same as before, not as grand perhaps, but stronger in all the broken places. And it was his.